In this lesson, we are going to talk about sheet metal cuts and sheet metal forming tools. But before we do that, let me mention the part you see on the screen is from an earlier lesson, and the name of this part is edge flange and can be found in your working files folder. We are going to start by talking about sheet metal cuts. SolidWorks has provided many different cut shapes in the design library, and they're very easy to place on a sheet metal part. So let's go to the design library, expand the design library, expand the features folder, and select sheet metal. And notice the many different sheet metal cut shapes. I am going to use the A081 shape. Now, to place this on the sheet metal part, you simply hold down the left mouse button and notice the preview on the sheet metal part. As I drag it to different faces, the preview updates. I'll place the sheet metal cut on this flange, release the left mouse button, and the property manager opens. Now there's two important items in this property manager. First, we can select the location of the cut, and we can do that by selecting Edit Sketch. A dialog box opens telling me that after I am done editing the sketch, if I select back, I will be taken back to the property manager. However, if I select Finish, SolidWorks will close me out of the sketch and close me out of the property manager for the cut feature. Now before we do that, let's zoom up on this area and add a couple smart dimensions. I am going to locate this feature from the left edge at a distance of 12 and from the top edge a distance of 12. My sketch is fully defined. I am now going to select back. Going back to the property manager, a second important item is we have the capability to change the dimension values for the cut feature. And all we need to do is put a check mark in this checkbox here for override dimension values, and then change any values that we need to update. I'll change this from 12.7 to 12. The preview updates, and I can now close out of the property manager. And placing sheet metal cuts is as simple as that. Now we're going to talk about sheet metal forming tools. SolidWorks provides a library of many different forming tools. Forming tools allow you to stretch, bend, and deform sheet metal. So let's go back to the design library, expand forming tools, and notice we have 5 different folders that we can go into. I am going to select lances. Under lances, I have 7 different lance forming tools. Now we're going to place this just like we placed the sheet metal cut feature. I am going to hold down the left mouse button, drag it out to the sheet metal part. Now before I release the left mouse button, notice the lance is going into the part. If I select the tab key, it will reverse the direction of the lance. Or I can simply release the left mouse button and flip the direction here. Notice in the property manager, we also have the capability to rotate the angle of the lance. So I'm going to type in 90 degrees. The lance updates on the screen. And also notice we have a tab for controlling the position of the lance. So I'm going to go and zoom up on this area and apply a couple smart dimensions. We'll dimension this to 20. And we will do the same in this direction. Zoom out a bit and notice the new location for the lance. I'm going to go ahead and close out a dimension, close out of the property manager for the forming tool, and now we have a lance in the sheet metal part. And just like any other feature, the sheet metal cut and the forming tool feature can be edited by simply right mouse clicking and select Edit Feature. And this concludes our lesson on sheet metal cuts and sheet metal forming tools. Now we are going to examine how to modify an existing sheet metal forming tool. The model I have on the screen, just like the last lesson, is the edge flange, and this can be found in your working files folder. In order to modify an existing sheet metal forming tool, we must go into the Design Library, expand the Design Library, expand Forming Tools, and once again, we are going to go into Lances. I am going to modify the angled lance, but I do want to show you what it looks like unmodified in its original state. I'm going to place it. I'll roll the model just to give you a better idea of what we are looking at. And now let's modify that forming tool. We need to return to the Design Library and right mouse click on Angled Lance. We'll select Open, and it opens as a regular SOLIDWORKS part file. Notice Feature Manager tree and a simple part on the screen. You probably also notice that we have some different colors on this part, and these colors are important. Red represents the surfaces which will be removed in the sheet metal part, and yellow are the surfaces to be kept. Now before we modify this, let's take a look at how this forming tool was created. If we roll back the Feature Manager tree, we see a base was created to design the forming tool on, and next we have a boss extrude for the basic shape of the forming tool. Then we modify it with a cut extrude and a fillet. And then as a last step, we use a cut extrude to remove the base. Now we're going to modify this. So all we need to do is locate the appropriate sketch for the modification. I'm going to modify sketch 2. And I am going to remove this line here. I'll extend this line up and then create a new line from this point to this point and then close out of the sketch. Now the forming tool is modified, but we're not done. We have to redefine the forming tool. In order to do that, we go to the Insert pull-down menu, Sheet Metal, Forming Tool. A very simple property manager opens, asking for a stopping face and faces to be removed. The stopping face is nothing more than the face on this part, which will tell SOLIDWORKS how deep this forming tool should go into the sheet metal part. So this would be our stopping face here. The next window is asking for faces to remove. So I'll work around the part and select these 3 faces. I am now done with this tab in the Property Manager. I'll switch over to the Insertion Point tab. And SOLIDWORKS has already specified the insertion point as being the center point of this face. And that's a good insertion point, so we're going to keep it and close out of the Property Manager. Now notice the stopping face is cyan in color. The faces to be removed are red, and the faces to be kept are yellow. Now before I leave this part file, I need to save this as a new forming tool. So I'm going to select Save As. And by selecting Save As, this will allow me to keep my original angled lance as it was, and to create a new one under a new name. So I'm simply going to add the word modified. So this forming tool is called Angled Lance Modified. I'll save the forming tool. I'm going to close out of this part file. My sheet metal part is now displaying on the screen. I'll return to the Design Library, and you can see our new forming tool, Angled Lance Modified. I'm going to place it in the sheet metal part, close out of the Property Manager, and then roll the model so you can see the difference between the two. The original Angled Lance forming tool and the modified Angled Lance forming tool. And this concludes our lesson on modifying existing forming tools. In this lesson, we are going to take a look at how to create a new sheet metal forming tool. Now you may be wondering, why would you do that when you have an entire design library full of forming tools? Well, let's go into the design library and take a look at them. Now, after examining all of the various type of forming tools, if you cannot locate anything close to what you need, which means if you could modify it like we did in an earlier lesson, but if you can't locate anything close to what you need, you will be required to create a new forming tool. And in all reality, it's actually pretty simple. So let's begin. You want to start by creating a new part file, which I already did, and then you want to create an extruded base on which to create or design this forming tool on. So I am going to select Extruded Boss Base, and then the top plane. Now the shape and size of this base is not important, so I will select Center Point Rectangle, stretch it out. No smart dimensions are needed. Close out of the sketch. A thickness of 10 is fine. Again, the thickness is not critical. We are just looking for a base. Close out of the Boss Extrude command. Now I am ready to begin designing my forming tool. I am once again going to select Extruded Boss Base and begin my sketch on the front plane. I will view normal to the front plane and then start sketching. We'll put a large radius, extend it down, and then back to the starting point. Next, we'll add some smart dimensions so we can get this fully defined. We'll set this to a height of 10, this horizontal leg to 5, the radius to 10, and this leg here, 10. And you see the sketch is fully defined, so we can close out of the sketch. We are then returned to the Property Manager for the Extrude command, and I want to extrude this about the midplane for a distance of 15 millimeters. I will close out of the Boss Extrude command, and I am almost finished. But first, I must add a fillet to this edge here. Because if you were to lance this into a sheet metal part, the sheet metal part will not like this sharp edge. So I will select the fillet command, select this edge, and then input a radius. Now it's important to note for this radius that the radius must be no smaller than the thickness of the part in which you will be using this forming tool in. So my sheet metal part that I will be placing this in is 18 gauge or 1.5 millimeters. So this radius must be at least 1.5 millimeters. I am going to type 4. Close out of the fillet command, and there's my fillet. Now the last step is to remove this base. While it's not necessary to remove the base, it does help you in visualizing your forming tool. The easiest way to remove this base is to go into the Extrude Cut feature, select this top face as your sketch plane, convert entities of this top face, and then close out of the sketch. And for direction, you want to select Through All. Click the green check mark, and the base is gone. There's our new forming tool. Now, just like we did in an earlier lesson, we have to define the forming tool. In order to define the forming tool, in an earlier lesson we selected Insert, Sheet Metal, Forming Tool, or you can go to the Sheet Metal tab and go into the ribbon and select Forming Tool. I am going to select the bottom face of this part here as my stopping face, and then select the 3 vertical planar faces as my faces to remove. I am going to close out of the forming tool, and notice all of my colors on the screen are correct. Cyan is the stopping face, red are the faces to be removed, and yellow are the faces that we are keeping. Now the last step is to save this as a forming tool. The easiest way to save a new forming tool is to open up the design library and go into the appropriate folder and simply drag it from the Feature Manager tree, and notice my task pane closed. So what I should have done when I open the design library is to pin it open. So let's go back and redo this. I will drag part 1 over to this window, and I am prompted for a new forming tool name. We will call this Radio Lance. Select Save, and it's added to the window. Now, let's see if this works. Let's go into a part we used in an earlier lesson called edge flange, which can be found in your working files folder, and add this radial lance. I'll place it on this face. Let's go ahead and rotate it. There we go. We can position it. I'll add a couple smart dimensions. We'll set this to 40. And from this edge, we will set this to 35. Close out a dimension, close out of the Forming Tool Property Manager, and the lance is placed in the sheet metal part. Now I'm going to go back to an isometric view, close out of the design library, and let's roll the part so you can see what we produced. And there is our new lance in the sheet metal part. And this concludes our lesson on creating new sheet metal forming tools.